Just after Thanksgiving in 1987, a 7-year-old boy was traveling home to California with his family after spending the holiday in Las Vegas. Heavy traffic led the family to stop at a hotel and casino along the way. The hotel had an arcade, and his family set him up with a game while they waited. They believed he would be safe there. But shortly before they were ready to leave, he was gone. Witnesses would later report seeing the boy leave the arcade hand in hand with an unknown man. An intensive search continued for weeks before ending with the worst possible outcome. In the years that followed, the case would take a complicated path toward justice. But nearly 4 decades later, no one has ever been held responsible. I'm your host, Megan, and each week on A Simpler Time True Crime, I cover older unsolved cases and challenge the idea that a simpler time meant a safer time. This week, I'm bringing to you the unsolved murder of Alexander Thomas Harris. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining me for another episode. If not for listeners who tune in and week out, I wouldn't have the reach that this podcast has, and I hope to continue onward. So keep reaching out with cases, keep sharing with friends, and follow the Instagram and TikTok page for more info and cases in between episodes. In this week's episode, I cover a stranger abduction case of a child in Nevada, just outside of Las Vegas. This case is every parent's worst nightmare. And I do want to give a heads up that this episode does contain conversation around physical and sexual violence against a child. But as usual, I'll only include the details needed for the accuracy of the case. And with that, let's get into it. It was Friday, November 27th, 1987, the day after Thanksgiving, and 7-year-old Alexander Harris had traveled to visit family for the holiday in Las Vegas, alongside his mother Roxanne and his grandparents. On that Friday, the family was attempting to drive home to Mountain View, California. Mountain View is located in the Bay Area of California, a little over an 8-hour drive back from Las Vegas on a good traffic day. And if you've ever tried traveling either by air or car during the Thanksgiving holiday weekend, you know those are not the good traffic days. That was the case for Alexander's family, and the traffic on Interstate 15 was pretty much gridlocked. Frustrated, they decided to make the most of it and stop off to a desert resort and casino in nearby State Line, Nevada, about 40 miles outside of Las Vegas, to hopefully kill some time and wait out the traffic. The place they went to was a casino called Whiskey Pete's, and the name ties into the town's history. As you've probably already put together, the town is located near the state line of Nevada and California, and later in 1996, it would be renamed Primm, Nevada, after its founder. Many people stopped at the casinos there as their last chance to gamble in Nevada, and those who lived in Nevada would hop over into California to play the lottery because Nevada doesn't have a state lottery, so there's actually a special store there to buy tickets. Whiskey Pete's Hotel and Casino opened in 1977, and by 1987 had become the main attraction in the small desert community. Its name came from Pete McIntyre, who operated a gas station there during the 1920s. According to local history, McIntyre struggled to make enough money from travelers and began bootlegging alcohol during Prohibition, earning him the nickname Whiskey Pete. The casino leaned heavily into that legend, giving the isolated highway stop an Old West identity. The business sat in the Mojave Desert, where the climate is extremely dry and summer temperatures regularly climb over 100 degrees. Outside the small cluster of businesses along Interstate 15, the area is surrounded by miles of open desert, mountains, and dry lake beds. In 87, it was an especially small and isolated community, with little beyond Whiskey Pete's and a handful of other businesses catering to highway travelers. Many of the people who lived there were connected to Whiskey Pete's or worked at one of those nearby businesses. Most residents of the town worked at one of the casinos, and I'll have some photos of Whiskey Pete's and the area on the Instagram page at simplertimecrimepod. By 1987, Whiskey Pete's was a sizable roadside resort, although it was still much smaller than the 777-room property it would eventually become after later expansions. A hotel tower had been added in 1983, providing several hundred guest rooms, while the main public area included a casino floor with slot machines and table games, along with restaurants, a coffee shop, a bar, and lounge. It also had a video arcade where children could play while the adults and their families gambled nearby. The property was designed as an all-in-one stopping point where travelers could eat, get a room, gamble, or allow their children to play before continuing along Interstate 15. And that is just what Alexander Harris's family had planned. According to the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, which I'll just refer to as Metro PD after this, the casino was at capacity that day. This was not only because of the holiday, but also because there was a desert race taking place nearby, which was an off-road motorsports event where drivers raced trucks, motorcycles, and dune buggies across the rugged desert terrain. Alexander's mother, Roxanne, brought him to the arcade, and according to her statements to Metro PD, she set him up on a gaming machine where she could observe the arcade entrance. After approximately 25 minutes and a little before 11 a.m., Roxanne went to check on Alexander and couldn't locate him. As a mom who has had a kid duck behind a clothing rack at the store and felt that feeling in the pit of my stomach just for that moment, I can't even imagine how panicked she must have felt to not see him in a place like that. At first, she tried to remain calm. She walked throughout the arcade thinking he just wandered to a different part for another game. But when she couldn't locate him, she became frantic and started asking nearby casino guests if they had seen him. And people had. One eyewitness, a man named James Austin, heard the frantic mother and stopped her. He said to her, "Hey, I saw a little boy that looked like that, but he walked out of here with his dad." Roxanne told James that Alexander wasn't here with his dad. Roxanne and Alexander's father had actually split when he was just a preschooler. Roxanne had custody and the dad lived in San Diego. She asked James Austin to describe the clothing he saw the boy wearing, and he described his distinctive glasses, his red fleece jacket, jeans, and white sneakers. That was exactly what Alexander had been wearing. Another witness, a man named Steve Allen, reported that he saw a boy leaving with a man, and he said that they were walking hand in hand down the hallway, but that he got the impression that maybe the boy was in trouble with a parent and just getting sent back to his hotel room. With all this in mind, Roxanne and her parents called police, and deputies and detectives from Metro PD were sent out immediately to begin looking, and of course the casino staff were looking as well. With the idea right away that this could be a kidnapping, that definitely shaped the urgency of the situation. But for Roxanne Harris, she would later say that she was underwhelmed with the response, to say the least. She would later describe it as, quote, careless and inadequate, and said that the intensive search was not initiated soon enough. Roxanne's father, Ralph Diebolt, stated that the police who showed up were not trained in child abductions, and that they sent out a robbery detective instead. Still, news coverage from the time showed significant reporting on the case and on the search in those early days. They combed the vast California-Nevada border, looking for him using helicopters, ground searches, and ATVs. A composite sketch was made of the man Alexander was seen leaving the casino with, and a missing poster was distributed of Alexander. In addition to the clothing I already mentioned, Alexander was described as 4'5" and 60 pounds, with light brown hair and brown eyes. The suspect was described as a white man in his mid-30s, about 5'8" and 175 pounds, with light brown hair combed forward. There was no vehicle associated with the suspect, and they had no idea the direction he had gone. Now, 1987 was not known for having much in the way of video cameras or surveillance cameras yet, but you have to remember this was a casino, so there were actually plenty there. And detectives got to work right away with reviewing the various tapes and different angles, trying to see if they could catch any sight of little Alexander or the man he was said to have walked off with. if they saw anything on those tapes, they didn't release it to the public at that time. When the initial search on Friday was unsuccessful and Saturday turned up nothing, the FBI was called in. Not only was it clearly a kidnapping case, the proximity to the border of California yielded a high likelihood that the young boy could have been transported across state lines. Metro PD and the FBI sought to interview nearly every guest at the casino listed on the register, as well as all the employees. And according to reporting, they were able to track down almost all of them. They achieved this by running a DMV check of guests. Of course, they were especially looking for people who matched the description of the man seen walking away with Alexander so that they could verify alibis. By December 2nd, FBI spokesperson Tom Nicodemus told the media there were no new updates but said, quote, "There are some things we're looking into. We're checking some of the out-of-state leads." In the days following, news would break that they believed Alexander was in the Los Angeles area, and their investigation had led them in that direction. The Metro PD spokesperson stated that many Southern California residents stopped off at that casino while en route to Las Vegas or Los Angeles. They also stated that when Alexander disappeared, there was a large group of off-road enthusiasts from Los Angeles in town for the desert race that weekend, and that many were staying at Whiskey Pete's. That speculation wouldn't lead to any answers. But 33 days later, after Alexander's abduction, an irrigation worker would make a discovery that ended the search for Alexander and showed that he'd never made it far from the hotel. On Wednesday, December 30th, 1987, a gardener employed by the hotel was out checking an irrigation system when something caught his eye. Underneath a trailer about 200 yards from the casino was a pair of glasses on the ground. When he bent down to reach for them, he made a horrible discovery. Hidden underneath the trailer was the body of a child. This worker frantically called for law enforcement, and news of the discovery spread quickly. Roxanne had already been staying with relatives in Las Vegas since her son went missing, and she was notified that the body they discovered appeared to match the description of her son and the clothing he was last seen wearing. Reporters called Ralph DeBolt back in California, his grandfather, and asked for comment, and he said he was feeling the same panic he felt on the day Alexander went missing from Whiskey Pete's, and that he was just trying to make it to Vegas as quickly as possible while they awaited identification. By the following day, the last day of 1987, everyone's worst nightmares were confirmed. Alexander Thomas Harris had been found, just 200 yards from where he had initially gone missing. Scrutiny amplified on law enforcement, with many wondering how they could have gone and done this extensive search and not found him when he was there all along. And at first, they weren't so sure that was the case. Alexander's body had decomposed relatively slowly for the 33 days he had been exposed to the elements, so investigators initially considered whether he had been kept alive for some time before being killed and placed beneath the trailer. However, while the Las Vegas area becomes extremely hot during the summer, temperatures drop significantly as the seasons change, and that year had brought an unusually cold transition into winter. The Clark County Coroner's Office ultimately determined that Alexander had likely been killed shortly after his abduction and placed beneath the trailer soon afterward. The fixed lividity in his body matched the position in which he was found, showing that he had remained in that position after his death and had likely not been moved from another location. Initially, investigators would not reveal the cause of death, but it did eventually come out that Alexander died by suffocation. He was fully clothed in the same clothes he had been wearing when he went missing, and the autopsy revealed that he had not been the victim of a sexual assault. According to a Department of Justice study, when children are abducted by strangers and later killed, roughly 2/3 of those cases are sexually motivated. So it makes you wonder, what was the motive in this case? Alexander's body did not show any other signs of violence. Now, I want to talk about the layout of the property at this time. About 200 yards behind the main Whiskey Pete's building was a makeshift trailer park with dozens of mobile homes used to house casino employees. Alexander's body was deliberately concealed beneath one of those trailers. Sources differ on whether the man staying at this particular trailer was a casino manager or the casino's president, but we do know that investigators questioned him, confirmed his alibi, and ruled him out. The same unusually cold weather that slowed the decomposition of Alexander's body also limited the odor, which helps explain why the man staying in the trailer had not noticed anything unusual. On January 3rd, 1988, a funeral was held for the sweet 7-year-old boy remembered as trusting and loving. Alexander was the first grader with a toothy grin and a missing tooth like so many children his age. He spent most of his time with his mother, and the two loved hiking, riding bikes, and camping together. Alexander also loved to dance and was even taking lessons to learn the tango. He still had so much left to learn, try, and experience, and in an instant, all of that was taken from him. Metro PD and the FBI were definitely feeling the pressure to make an arrest. In February of 1988, they announced that they had done just that. Police arrested Howard Hopt, a 37-year-old computer analyst from San Diego, and charged him with Alexander's murder. Hopt posted the $350,000 bail while he waited for the case to go to trial. At the time of his arrest, law enforcement said several eyewitnesses had picked him out of a lineup as the man seen leaving Whiskey Pete's with Alexander. He also resembled the descriptions and composite sketches of the suspect. With multiple reported identifications and a suspect who had been staying at the hotel that weekend, it appeared police had finally found the man they had been searching for. I will post a picture of Howard on the Instagram page. Howard Hopt never denied being at Whiskey Pete's that weekend. He acknowledged that he was a registered guest at the hotel, but he said he was not on the property when Alexander disappeared. According to Hopt, he was with a friend at a land sailing event on a nearby dry lake bed. Still, the charges remained, and the trial was set to proceed, though there were many delays along the way. In January of 1989, the trial finally got underway, and right from the jump, it was clear that there were a lot of issues with the state's case. Much of it relied on eyewitness testimony, and let me tell you about that. To do so, I want to revisit some of those eyewitnesses we already know about and tell you about some new ones. First, there's James Austin, who was the witness who saw a frantic Roxanne and said, "I saw that boy, he was walking with his father." Which, just as a quick aside, Alexander's father was cleared in this case. He was in San Diego on that day. Okay, so James Austin was a California resident who was staying on the second floor of the hotel. According to him, he was leaving his room when he saw the boy and the suspect walk by him in the hallway. When he was first interviewed to help develop the composite, he stated that the suspect was white, 35 to 38 years old, wearing glasses and a brown jacket, and had his hair combed forward. Later, this would shift a bit. On January 22nd, 1988, Austin gave investigators another description of the man he remembered seeing with Alexander. He described someone between 38 and 40 years old, about 5'8", with brown hair combed forward, wire-rimmed glasses, and a tan jacket. On a scale from 1 to 10, Austin said he was about an 8 that Alexander was the child he saw in the hallway. That same day, investigators showed him surveillance footage from the arcade featuring a man in a tan jacket. Austin said that was not the man he remembered, pointing out the person in the footage appeared to be balding. But before any of this, Austin had already been shown a photographic lineup that included Hopt, and he had not identified him. Investigators then took Austin to Hopt's workplace in San Diego, where he sat near the entrance and watched about 10 people enter the building before focusing on Hopt. When Austin asked to see him again, investigators walked him past the area where Hopt worked, giving him a second opportunity to look at him. Afterward, Austin said he was between a 7.5 and an 8 that Hopt was the man he had seen with Alexander. He then selected Hopt from another photographic lineup and became one of the key witnesses describing as having identified him. But this was no longer a neutral identification. Austin had failed to select Hopt previously and was then repeatedly exposed to him at his workplace before choosing his photograph, which obviously created serious concerns that the process itself had influenced the identification. And I'm just getting started, because another witness we have not talked about yet was Catherine Perry, a 21 dealer at Whiskey Pete's who initially pointed the finger at someone else. Perry said she was on a break when she saw Alexander leaving the arcade with a man. When she greeted him, the man appeared startled or surprised and said hello in return and then walked away. On December 3rd, Perry told Metro PD she believed the man was John Bano, a casino employee she already knew. He was a bartender there. More than a month later, she described the man as 5'8" to 5'9", between 33 and 36, with light brown hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and a tan jacket. Perry was then shown 6 photographs, including one of Hopt. Although she said she could not make an absolute identification, she selected him and rated her certainty as an 8 out of 10. Investigators later then flew Perry to San Diego, where she posed as an interior decorator so she could tour Hopt's workplace and view him in person. After seeing him there, she raised her certainty to a 9. Perry acknowledged, however, that this identification was based on both her memory from November and the photograph of Hopt she had been shown. Next, you may remember Steve Allen, the initial eyewitness I mentioned who said he thought it was a boy who was maybe in some sort of trouble from misbehaving and was being taken back to his room. There's actually more to this account. So Steve was a maintenance man at the hotel, and his wife Carrie also worked there as a housekeeper. And they were meeting up for lunch that day. As they walked toward the casino, Steve and Carrie saw a man holding the hand of a young boy as they came down the hallway. Carrie described the man as at least 6 feet tall, with thinning light brown hair, a wisp of hair across his forehead, and wire-rimmed glasses. Steve estimated that he was between 6 feet and 6 feet 3, with sandy blonde or light brown hair and glasses. 2 days later, they were shown a photographic lineup that did not include Hopt. Both pointed to a man named Steve as a possible suspect. Then, on December 4th, they were shown a book of photographs and both selected casino employee John Bano. This was the same employee Catherine Perry had initially identified as the man she believed she saw with Alexander. Carrie said she was pretty sure Bano was the man they had seen, while Steve placed his certainty at around 90%. Then, on January 15th, investigators showed them another lineup, this time containing a photo of Hopt. Neither one identified him. In fact, Carrie said Hopt was definitely not the man she had seen and that he looked too old. Steve thought there was some resemblance, but he also said Hopt looked too old. His sideburns were too long, and his own memory had become foggy after seeing so many different people. But about a month later, you guessed it, Steve and Carrie were given the good old workplace tour. Out to San Diego they flew, and they were taken directly to Hopt's workplace. Like Catherine Perry, Carrie posed as an interior decorator to get inside, and she said she viewed around 70 people before identifying Hopt as the man from the hallway, this time placing her certainty between a 9 and 10. Steve also identified him with a certainty level of 9. Both explained that Hopt looked different in person than he had in the photograph. So once again, 2 witnesses who had initially selected other men and then failed to identify Hopt from a lineup became highly confident only after investigators brought them to his workplace to view him in person. And that is not an exhaustive list of all the witnesses who had a similar experience, including even a child witness. Outside of those eyewitness identifications, the state's case against Hopt was almost entirely circumstantial. A search of Howard Hopt's home and vehicle had no physical evidence tying him to the crime. The original description of the man was broad. Witnesses placed him anywhere from 5'8" to 6'3", and while most remembered wire-rimmed glasses and brown or light brown hair, they did not agree on how thick his hair was. A poor quality surveillance recording also showed a man in a tan jacket inside the arcade. But Austin specifically said that was not the man he had seen with Alexander because the man in the video appeared to be balding. Metro PD detectives testified they believed the man on the surveillance tape was Hopt. The defense called a video expert who said definitively it was not. The FBI would testify that in searching Harold Hopt's home, they found a lot of children's things, like a children's piggy bank, wrapped candies, model airplanes, and kites, and they found this to be odd for a man in his late 30s without any children. But those perceived oddities do not prove that he committed a murder. When it came to physical evidence, a partial print was found on Alexander Harris's eyeglasses that did not match Hopt. There is an important qualification to that, though, because Metro fingerprint examiners said that the print was such a poor sample that it likely could not be reliably identified at all. So it wasn't necessarily a usable print that definitively excluded Hopt, but it certainly did not connect him to the glasses either. The state had no other physical evidence tying Hopt to Alexander's abduction or his murder. The friend Hopt said he was with that day, who was his alibi, was not completely airtight because this man did confirm that he was with Hopt that day, but he said he wasn't sure exactly the time they met up, that they met up at the land sailing event, and it could have been anywhere from 9 to 12. He did confirm, though, that he was with him until sundown that evening. There were many twists and turns with this trial. For example, the trial judge came close to recommending an acquittal. The prosecutor reacted by saying Alexander's blood would be on the court's hands, and Detective Dillard personally called the judge's possible decision ridiculous, and the judge would later go on to say he felt intimidated. And there was a big falling out from this, with certain people getting in trouble at work. It was a mess. Ultimately, the trial would last for 5 weeks, and the 7-woman, 5-man jury would find Harold Hopt not guilty. For years after, Hopt would bring lawsuits against the county, the Metro PD, and the detectives on the case. Initially, he was awarded a multi-million-dollar settlement, but a judge later overruled this, saying it was excessive. Instead, they eventually settled, with the state reimbursing all of Hopt's legal expenses. This case and the trial would later be used as an example of the limitations of eyewitness identification, particularly how repeated exposure to a suspect and suggestive identification procedures can reshape a witness's memory and increase their confidence. After the trial, Alexander's case lost all momentum and quickly grew cold. Roxanne Harris brought a lawsuit against the casino because she shared that she didn't feel her concerns about her son's abduction were taken seriously at first, and that the response was not swift enough, and that she was led to believe that security would prevent such an abduction from happening. I couldn't find the outcome of that lawsuit. I want to be clear that I am not victim blaming here. I can only imagine the pain and guilt that Roxanne lives with. Speaking purely from a place of education, I can't emphasize enough that nobody will supervise your kids to the standards that you will. And it's just one of those things that is challenging because I do know that Whiskey Pete's did market their arcade as a place to drop your kids for a break while you were there. But at the same time, it's not one of those scenarios where you sign your kids in and out and there's distinctive supervision or that there's any official security procedures. So there was nothing truly in place to stop this from happening because he wasn't forcibly grabbed. There was no obvious spectacle that happened. A man who many believed looked like his father, or could be the father, just walked out with him. I also just wanted to mention that Roxanne's father got involved with the Kevin Collins Foundation for Missing Children, which I've mentioned on this podcast a few times before. And I always find that when people who are involved in these cases are able to channel their own grief and turn it into something good and help other people who are going through it, I just find that so beautiful. And the strength is amazing, and I want to put that out there. Nearly a decade later, a strikingly similar tragedy would happen at another Prim casino, directly across the interstate from Whiskey Pete's. Once again, the victim would be 7 years old. Once again, the child would be spending time in a casino arcade while a parent gambled nearby. And once again, the person responsible would lead that child away without anyone realizing the danger until it was too late. This time, however, it happened during the wee hours of the morning. In the early morning of May 25th, 1997, 7-year-old Sharice Iverson was at the Prima Donna Resort and Casino with her father Leroy and her 14-year-old brother Harold. Her father had left Sharice in Harold's care in the arcade while he drank and gambled. Casino security had already warned Leroy twice that Sharice should not be left there unsupervised at that hour. At around 1:30 in the morning, staff found her alone and paged the family. Harold came to collect her, but a short time later, Sharice was once again in the arcade without anyone consistently watching her. Later that morning, security reportedly found her asleep in a chair and once again told the family that the children needed to leave. Also at the Prima Donna that morning were 18-year-old Jeremy Strohmeyer and his friend David Cash Jr., who had traveled from Long Beach with Cash's father. At around 4 in the morning, Strohmeyer began interacting with Sharice near the arcade. What began with the two throwing wet paper towel wads eventually moved into the women's restroom after Sharice went inside and Strohmeyer followed her. David Cash followed them into the restroom and saw Strohmeyer force Sharice into one of the stalls. And just a bit of a heads up and content warning for this next part. For the next minute or so, I do get into the part that discusses sexual violence towards a child. Cash looked over from the neighboring stall and saw Strohmeyer restraining her with his hand over her mouth while sexually touching her. But instead of intervening, finding security, or calling help, Cash walked out of the restroom and left Sharice alone with him. Not only that, it was said that several people came in and out of the restroom during this time. Strohmeyer came out about 20 minutes later and told Cash that he had killed the little girl. If your blood isn't already boiling from everything I've told you thus far, according to Cash's own account, his response was to ask whether Sharice had been sexually aroused during the assault. A reporter would later ask him why he would ask something like that, and Cash answered, "I don't know, it's just the way I think." Sharice was found inside the restroom stall, where she had been sexually assaulted and strangled. Casino surveillance cameras had captured Strohmeyer following her toward the restroom, and police released those images to the public. 2 of his classmates recognized him when the footage appeared on the news, and 3 days later after the murder, Strohmeyer was arrested at his home in Long Beach. During questioning, Strohmeyer confessed to sexually assaulting Sharice and killing her to stop her screams. He was charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and sexual assault and faced the possibility of the death penalty. His defense was led by Leslie Abramson, the high-profile attorney known for representing Eric Menendez. Strohmeyer later claimed that he had been under the influence of drugs and alcohol and could not remember what happened. But just before his trial was scheduled to begin in September of 1998, he accepted a plea agreement. He pleaded guilty to murder, kidnapping, and 2 counts of sexual assault. The following month, he was sentenced to 4 consecutive life terms, 3 without the possibility of parole. But the part of this case that caused almost as much public outrage as the murder itself was David Cash's behavior. Cash was never charged because, under law at the time, witnessing the crime without participating in it did not make him legally responsible. But it was not only his failure to help Sharice that angered people. It was also the complete lack of empathy he showed afterward. He told reporters that he was not going to, quote, lose sleep over somebody else's problems, and said that the attention surrounding the case had actually made it easier for him to meet women. Yeah, I have several thoughts crossing through my mind about him that I won't say out loud. Cash went on to attend University of California, Berkeley, where students and protesters called for his expulsion. The university said it had no legal basis to remove him because he had not been convicted of a crime or violated its student conduct rules. Sharice's mother, Yolanda Manuel, continued pushing for him to be held accountable, but prosecutors maintained that there was not enough evidence to charge him as an accomplice. His inaction did lead to changes in the law. Nevada lawmakers introduced what became known as the Sharice Iverson Bill, requiring people in certain circumstances to report violent or sexual crimes against children. California later passed the Sharice Iverson Child Victim Protection Act, making it a misdemeanor to witness the murder, rape, or specified sexual abuse of a child under 14 and fail to notify law enforcement. The case also forced casinos to confront the safety of children brought onto their properties and the danger of allowing them to remain unsupervised in arcades and other areas separated from the gaming floor. In my personal opinion, there really shouldn't be a scenario where kids are in an adjacent arcade while their parents are off gambling. Take even abduction and quote-unquote stranger danger out of it. Minors aren't even allowed onto a casino gaming floor, period. So when these kids are left unsupervised, how can they even reach out to their parents for help if need be? If you like gambling in casinos, no judgment here, but if you have the money to gamble, you should have the money for a sitter. So hire one of those and make the whole thing a kid-free outing. There has not been any public movement in Alexander Harris's case for years. If you listen, you know I'm not one to typically get too opinionated or weigh in on all the theories, so I'm breaking my own rules a little bit today, but I do want to point out some things that stood out to me from the original investigation and things that came up in the trial that I think could be considerations if Metro PD gave this case another look. First, I think there is a strong possibility that the perp was either a registered guest or an employee. The idea that witnesses saw who they believed to be Alexander with his kidnapper on the second floor of the hotel could lead you to believe that it was a guest who had a room on that floor. But where his body was found was where all the employees stayed in that trailer park housing. I wonder what records police have of who was staying in which trailer, and if they were genuinely able to rule out every single employee who lived in those trailers. Did they find out if employees had any guests living with them in those trailers? Someone just short term. And what about that one employee that two people ID'd as the person, the bartender John Bano? Interestingly enough, when searching his trailer, detectives found a tan members-only style jacket like the one seen on the surveillance video. During the Hop trial, his defense attorney pressured John Bano on the stand about this, and he didn't have an explanation for why it was there or whose it was. He simply stated that he didn't own a jacket that looked like that, and he doesn't know why it would be found in his trailer. Police did say he had an alibi for that time. And look, I'm not pointing fingers at Bano. He's never been charged with any crime, but in a case where we know detectives had such tunnel vision, is it worth revisiting his alibi just to ensure it's airtight? Speaking of that surveillance camera, I know it was described as pretty grainy, but is it worth looking into seeing if it can be enhanced with all the modern technology we have? I am admittedly not an expert on this, and I know there are likely limitations, but the fact that they have a potential suspect on camera and they have the camera footage, that does seem big to me. And then what about DNA? Back at the time of the first trial, DNA was not a tool that could be used. But think about it. The glasses, the clothes, hopefully all of that is still preserved and there's a chance. Finally, I haven't mentioned one interesting piece that came up at the trial. A medical examiner testified Alexander did not die of an asthma attack. And you might be thinking like, okay, well, why bring that up? Well, he reportedly did have a history of pretty severe asthma attacks. The defense brought up the idea that he may have had an asthma attack as a way of providing doubt that he was harmed at all by another person. And of course, the defense is creating reasonable doubt for their client. We know that Alexander was led away from the video arcade by an adult who potentially took him up to a room. He was seen on the second floor. So there is a high likelihood that someone took him to do harm. And I don't buy outright that there's no foul play. But hear me out. The medical testimony was that the autopsy did not reveal the changes the doctors would ordinarily expect in a fatal asthma case. A deadly asthma attack typically leaves physical evidence inside the lungs and airways, including severe congestion and thick mucus obstructing the bronchial passages, and those findings apparently were not present. The condition of Alexander's body limited what could be determined, but the absence of those characteristic signs made an asthma death unlikely in the expert's view. Unlikely, but not impossible. The medical evidence instead supported asphyxia caused by pressure to Alexander's neck. This was apparently not a case in which a clear ligature mark or dramatic injury remained visible. Rather, the conclusion was based on the internal findings and on ruling out other plausible natural causes, including asthma. But let's just say they couldn't be 100% certain. What about a scenario where Alexander gets away from the man who kidnapped him, possibly from a hotel room or another trailer, and he makes a run for it? And in an attempt to evade his kidnapper, he hides underneath a trailer. Between the panic of the whole situation and fleeing as fast as he could, what if that set off an asthma attack? And he didn't have an inhaler or rescue med, obviously, so I only say it because of a couple of other things. One, all of his clothes were on, and there were no signs of a sexual assault or other violence against his body. So what would otherwise be the motive for someone to just abduct and strangle or suffocate him? Also, he was found face down. If you put yourself in the very sick shoes of a child abductor and predator, in a scenario where you're carrying a body to dispose of it, the natural way to carry a child is under their back and neck with the one arm and under their knees with the other, really if you're carrying anyone in general. So the most logical way to put them under the trailer would be in that same position. But if you're a boy running from someone and hiding under a trailer, you would naturally lay on your stomach. This is just a scenario I haven't seen discussed, but I think is something worth considering. And this, of course, would not remove blame or culpability from the suspect who abducted him that day. Whatever the case may be, the case deserves a detailed, fresh look. The problems with the original investigation will always be part of this case, but they don't have to be its final chapter. Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department now has an opportunity to take what has long been a painful mark on this investigation and turn it around by giving the evidence a fresh look, applying the tools available today, and giving this case a real chance at being solved. And based on what I'm seeing on the website, it looks like they are doing so with Alexander's case and a lot of cold cases. I can tell they're investigating a lot of time and resources into cold cases, which is great to see. That cannot undo what happened or return the years Alexander's family lost, but it could create a path forward toward the answers they have waited nearly 4 decades to receive. If you have any information on the abduction and murder of Alexander Harris in 1987, please contact the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department Homicide Section at 702-828-3521. To remain anonymous, contact Crime Stoppers at 702-385-5555 or visit crimestoppersofnv.com. This has been another episode of A Simpler Time True Crime. I know I typically end with asking for 5-star reviews, and while I certainly still love those and will take them, I ask that whatever platform you're listening on to please also subscribe or follow, particularly if you're someone who listens on Apple. Many of my listeners are over on Spotify, and I'd like the Apple community to find me as well. And following or subscribing to the pod helps me do just that. If you have any case suggestions, please email me at simplertimecrimepod@gmail.com or DM me on Instagram. As always, thank you so much for listening, and join me again next Monday.